Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour as I talk with Dr. Scherer about leadership, mindfulness, and resilience. Dr. Douglas Scherer is a dedicated father, author, professor, researcher, and speaker. His personal journey through the challenges of overcoming chronic pain from surgery complications and managing a global outage team led him to discover the transformative power of mindfulness and strategic thinking. Dr. Scherer helps leaders improve their mental well-being, enabling them to tackle high-stakes decisions with clarity and purpose. His engaging talks and workshops help leaders embrace flexibility and agency through interactive practices and heartfelt stories. He is the author of the best-selling book F.O.R.G.E.D, 6 Practices of Great Leaders in Volatile Times, which distills wisdom from leaders across various sectors into actionable practices. As a professor, he teaches strategic advocacy and leadership, and he has a blast going to Disney parks with his daughter and hanging with his best buddy, Felix the dog. Doug, thank you. Welcome, Douglas, I guess. I will say, in addition to the bio, I know you through our meditation and mindfulness training. I don't even know how many years ago, maybe 2017, was it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Take my glasses off because I notice I've got kind of a Halloween effect going on, so people can be able to see me and I can see you better. That was a magical time up with a group we had while we were studying MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's just a life-changing event, I think, 10 days up in the mountains. So that's where we met. Yes.
And you are on the East Coast. And for all of these years, we've maintained contact, like kind of cheering and supporting each other on. And during the pandemic, I was leading some mindfulness sessions. You'd join in, and I always appreciated seeing your face. And now we have all of this time to talk together. Reading your bio, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I've known you for years, but I want to know like where all of this has led you to. I know that you were working on your book. I have it on my bookshelf. And welcome to the show, Dr. Scherer.
Thank you. Now we're both doctors.
Yes.
You're Dr. T, and I have started using Dr. Doug, which is my students who are into branding and marketing. A lot of them, they said I should be going by Dr. Doug, so I'm trying that out nowadays.
That's weird. I almost called you that, and on my picture that I sent you, I called it Dr. Doug. So
right.
I think that's good.
So. It's just been just a life journey coming to this book, to this moment, and you've kind of outlined it in your introduction in terms of just the medical challenges, and how I used mindfulness to help overcome them, because this thing we studied in BSR, the first I started finding out about it was for chronic pain purposes. And but I find as I was writing the book and as I've kind of gone along in my corporate work as well, is the relationship between the mindfulness and leadership, and not just in terms of relaxation, which is in some ways almost a byproduct of the process of being aware. But it's kind of sold, the ROI on it is usually like, okay, well, we're going to relax you. But the awareness and the relationship to even strategic thinking, the way, you have to open your mindset. So somehow it's just kind of all come together like in this moment of understanding for me.
Isn't that amazing? And I like that you say that it's a byproduct, because I think a barrier for many people with mindfulness, as I'm sure you know, is that it's when people are like, well, I can't relax. My mind can't be clear. And it's like, oh, no. That's a lovely byproduct if you get to it, but it's not the intention. And it's giving that, pause, that, response time, so that you can think of other opportunities, think of other ways of doing things, rather than getting stuck in like, this is the way it's always been. Because I worked in corporate as well. So for many years, and this is, before school, before anything, there would be so many people I would work with, I'd say, well, why are we doing it this way? Well, this is the way it's always done. And so, and at the time I didn't, have like the skills to kind of challenge or confront that in a way. So I just kind of went, all right, well, I guess I'll do it this way. Because I didn't have that critical thinking. But when you're pausing, when you're bringing mindfulness in, then you're saying like, oh, there's many options. It doesn't have to be one way. And so your book is with, the 6 practices and the stories. Is there a story from your book that stands out as kind of that encapsulates what it's about? And it could be yours or someone that you talk to.
Yeah, I just was so lucky to find so many great folks to interview for the stories in the book, all the way from someone who, Virginia Gambal, who's on the board of JetBlue, and who basically brought Wi-Fi to airplanes, to the local folks who ran the local food pantry, and how it just, during the pandemic, it just exploded, and then everything they had to do just exploded. And the leadership left. And so different ways that you become leaders and interact with leaders, and also handle folks that you're leading. It's kind of all in there. In the case of the food pantry folks, they kind of rose unexpectedly to leadership, because as all this stuff was happening, suddenly their 80-year-old, the person who was leading it, had to step down because of illness, and suddenly they just rose to the top, and they had to deal with, do we wear masks? Do we not wear masks? All these kind of relationship things, as well as all of a sudden having to feed something like 400 times the number of folks, families that they were feeding before, and how they had to reach out, and this is the thing about where business and awareness and all comes together. And I didn't anticipate talking about this story, but it seems to be emerging. They had to get more food, so they went out, and there's a lot of, it's like where I'm living in Westchester, there's a lot of farms, local farms in this area and stuff. And so they went out and they got a lot of donations, but then also the restaurants started donating because their food was going bad. But then they went, all of a sudden, we have this like, embarrassment of riches. Suddenly they had so much food, they had nowhere to put it. So now they had to go back to the restaurants and say, and all these folks go, hey, can you actually store this for us? But it's just all this like being aware and in the moment stuff kind of comes to play right then, because there's, when you're in these emerging emergency kind of situations, and businesses like that, things are always changing, and if you are not changing, you're just going to become stagnant, and, no one will, you basically become a commodity, and then you don't have a competitive advantage. But it's this constantly being able to change with the environment that you're trying to serve, that makes people survive and succeed. So if all they said is like, oh, well, we don't have enough refrigerators, I guess we'll just throw the food out, that wouldn't make sense at all, right? But because they're dedicated to this purpose, and this is where the values piece comes in, because they're dedicated to the purpose of feeding folks, and they're not just in it to raise awareness of their leadership skills or something, they have to find ways to solve these problems. And so I didn't work with them on mindfulness. I interviewed them for the story, but it's just, that's the kind of problem-solving capability that happens like when you're aware and in the moment, and you're in some ways it's flow. I I kind of have an up and down with the flow concept, because I've seen people say I'm in the flow, but all they're doing is staring at their phone and being taken away, through all the algorithms, and they say I'm in my flow. Well, that's not quite flow.
You're flowing away.
Yeah.
Yes. And so with leadership, so this is interesting because I co-taught a mindful leadership class or course in Reno when I was at the University of Nevada, Reno. And this was in their business, their MBA program, right? So it was like one Saturday a month. It was really like a retreat, like once a month. It was pretty intensive. And I had taken the course, and then my dissertation chair is the one who had created and taught the course. And so I was able to then do that for a number of semesters with her, which was amazing. But it is an interesting thing to bring mindfulness into leadership, right? Because sometimes, and I know mindfulness and how we think of mindfulness is shifting. But people might think it's woo-woo or, hippy dippy. And so you are also teaching upcoming leaders at Columbia, but you are working and speaking to corporate groups. So what is the response? What's the reaction as you bring your message to them?
Yeah. Well, it's surprisingly very positive. For some reason, I thought I'm going to be, I've now stood in groups of, technology, large rooms full of technology people, HR folks. And for some reason, I thought, and maybe it's just my own worry about life, but I thought, oh, this is going to be like you're saying, it's going to be seen as like hippy dippy or something. Mm-hmm. But first of all, I don't just walk in there, and just say we're going to meditate. I have a lot of statistics. And, I'm a lecturer, so I do my research. But the response is very good. And I'll give you an example. When I was speaking to a large group of technology folks, and I was talking about productivity and how the kind of micromanagement that we're seeing, a lot of micromanagement today, because the opposite of that is lack of trust, right? So when you see a ton of micromanagement, it's lack of trust. And part of that is because of the work from home. And so what happens is, since we don't trust our own employees, even though why are we measuring them by time spent at the keyboard? I don't know, versus, productivity or the outcomes they're doing. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is now you get these like micromanagement ways of managing folks because we don't trust them to do their work, which is that how many keystrokes did you do? Do you, how many times did I, touch my keypad?
Yes.
My touchpad, all that kind of stuff. How much, and then they're, tracking bandwidth and all those things. How much data do I, well, if I'm on the phone, unless I'm doing my phone through the screen, it's just my own phone. So you're not tracking that bandwidth. And of course, the response to that from the employees is often, they have these things now that you can actually just it's like a device that looks like a finger. There's all kinds of things. It'll just swirl the mouse, so that the mouse just keeps the thing alive. Okay, so now you don't trust me. So now I'm coming back with this way of undoing the statistics, the micromanagement you're doing. So now it's a battle instead of working together, And now I forgot what your question was originally, but the thing is so when I'm working, so when we work with these teams, and I talk about, and if you look at the Gallup polls, and this is one of the things I talk about, is where are we in terms of, so this Gallup poll, it's a worldwide Gallup poll that Gallup does every year, 20,000 people across multiple cultures and countries and things like that, up and down the hierarchy. And what do you see exploding? Of course, stress, outright anger, something like 36 respondents. I don't remember that. I don't have these statistics in front of me anymore. It's like 36% of the respondents, anger.
Yeah.
It's almost the same amount, like 32 something percent of the respondents, physical pain. right? And then, of course, up at the top, stress and frustration and all those things. So how about we start working on that stuff instead of just making it worse, right? Like putting all these tracking devices in and say we don't trust you, and it doesn't matter how good your work is if you're not, sending me enough bandwidth when you're not working. Or, and there's a big battle now about return to office versus not, and there's pluses and minuses of that, so, but either way, if you're not fixing the culture, then you could bring all the people back to the office and you're still just gonna be working inefficiently, right?
Yes.
So you really got to fix the culture. And we know that like culture has strategy for breakfast. That's what the Peter Drucker thing, I think. So you've got to fix the culture. And so that's one place that, being mindful, being aware, and I love the idea of awareness as part of this thing, because it's aware of the emotions, aware of the physical sensations, aware of the thoughts. If you're aware of all those things as you're making strategic decisions or as you're leading, you will make better decisions for everyone involved.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that everyone will be happy necessarily, but you'll make better decisions. So that's one of the places where it comes into play.
I love that. And so you touched on a whole bunch of things that I'm just going to come back and pause, because yes, this idea of trust, actually in, the research that we did and things that we had seen, and you probably know this well, an effective leader is trust is like the capital thing. Like, do you trust them? Do they trust you? And in this dynamic of okay, if you are micromanaging me, and how am I going to then get away with it because now I'm irritated? It's not mutual trust. It's not mutual respect. And then when you're bringing in, the things that have gone up, anger, stress, physical pain, and you're right, what is at the core? Because we are, even if we are leader, or when we're leaders, and I think everyone's a leader in no matter what role, whether you are leading in the home or leading anywhere. So I think we agree on that. But this idea of we're leaders and we're people. And I think we kind of forget that, and people get a little lost or caught up in either their titles or, whatever this is. But this idea of how do we address the individual so that we can create mutual trust and respect so that everything can operate better. And it's gotten really strange with technology that we have these benefits. I mean, you're in New York and I'm in Minnesota, and here we are and connecting to all over the world, which is fantastic. And if someone is just, monitoring finger strokes or whatever they would do, even with Zoom calls back in the pandemic. And, people were finding all sorts of ways to quote unquote beat the system. But why are we trying to beat a system, rather than work together and create something together? And I know that's probably way too huge, but it's how do you even start chipping away at the behemoth that business and corporation has become?
Yeah. I'm going to hit that in a second, but I want to backtrack a little bit because we were talking about when I was speaking before, and do people relate? And what you're talking about, they related to completely, right? And they related to both from being a leader and having to do these kinds of things, because often the leaders, often this stuff comes from somewhere on high, this is how we're going to do this, okay? So those leaders who were designing those processes decided this, and now these poor leaders are being done unto, even though they don't want to lead their groups that way, right? And so the people in this particular technology talk extremely related to that, whether they were leaders or whether they were not leaders. And so that's when I started doing the mindfulness practice with them, and I brought them into the moment, and the whole room settled down, and they felt it. And I had people coming up to me all day about that. And I'm not, I'm just doing the same kind of stuff, that we were taught, right? But it's just that they're not either not exposed to it or they're not given the opportunity for it. But when they do that, they can now say, well, maybe I am being done unto, maybe I have to do this, but how can I implement that in a way that's closer to me, closer to the way that my values and the way I want to lead.
Oh, I like
the other thing you mentioned is that leaders are people and that everyone's a leader. And I also stress this in the talk. This is probably why we align so well. Right. We have the same mindset. But leaders, the thing about leaders being people, one, is that, yes, and you hit it right on the head, and I do bring this up, is that whether you're given the leadership role or not, you're always making leadership level decisions. I mean, sometimes, it's just like, what food am I going to eat? So that's not really, that it's just my taste buds and I'm alone, but you are often given a chance, even if you're just an individual contributor, I would say, versus, a manager or a leader. You're making decisions that affect other folks. And so you do have a responsibility there, or like you're saying, if it's for your family, or even if it's just not just a life decision. And I know you deal a lot with folks on the grief side, so I'm guessing you're probably dealing with, you tell me, but I think you're probably dealing with a lot of folks who have parents who are either in hospice or that they have to take care of. And so those are people who are probably had to step up to lead, never planned for that leadership role, but now are having to make those tough decisions. Those are leaders. And they may not see it as themselves. They may just see it as, I've got to get this done. That's leadership, just like the food pantry folks. They're stepping up to the plate.
Yes, absolutely. And I actually had someone on, I don't remember what episode it was, but Christina Keys, and she'd talked about that when her mom got ill. And she's like, I all of a sudden had to step into this role of, accountant, physical therapist, managing her mom's health and supporting her through, the last, years of her life. And so, well, actually it was a decade, but anyways, you're right. And so anyone who's listening, if you're like, leadership, that's not who I am. Actually, I like, inviting you to pause and say, in what way are you making decisions and leadership decisions? And I do think even in, leading your own body, you're like, oh, taste buds, but no, really, truly, it's like, if I'm saying I want, these outcomes, right? Well, like a leader has outcomes. And if I'm saying I want outcomes, then I have to make decisions to support those outcomes, even if it's what I put in my body, how I move my body, how I'm supporting my health. And so, if we're looking at that, if you want a desired outcome, you're leading. And that can be in any way.
Right.
And I love that. And when you said that, you led them through a mindfulness thing that we had learned together, it made me flash back because you and I taught a section together in our training. I don't know if you remember that. And we had kind of joked like, oh, we're going to do something someday. And I'm like, oh, here we are. We're doing something someday. Didn't picture it to be like this because Zoom really wasn't a thing back then, but here we are. That's amazing.
Well, I'm still thinking we got to do a retreat together.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. That would be amazing. Oh, yeah. Yes. We'll take that offline because I could geek out about that. All right. We'll design it right here while everyone's listening. No, that's not good content.
Yeah. Phone in and let us know.
I do. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Oh, no, just the other thing you asked is how do you get that done? I would say the first step is you, ourselves. And so, Sage Publications, probably, they do a lot of qualitative research publications. And so there are a couple articles in there that are really interesting about stepping up to leadership. And they're across multiple articles. This is kind of my summary of the situation, is that one is that when you step up to a leadership role or given a leadership role and you take on a leadership role, there's a lot of pressure and you change because of the different, responsibilities you now have. So there's a lot more pressure on you. B is that people view you, when you step up to these roles and you're leading a group of folks, people see you differently. And they see you in a way that you're not anticipated to have any kind of mental health challenges. You're not even allowed to, because people are seeing you as someone who is leading us, and is strong. Therefore, that whole idea of vulnerability, you're not even allowed to present because, you're seen as something else. You're also seen as having that if you do have any kind of mental health challenges or emotional challenges, that you as a leader are being given the facilities, up the wazoo to help you through it and all the support you need and everything, let alone, they don't know if you're even able to voice it or not, or even if you're aware of it or not. Just we talked about, you don't even know if you're a leader or not in some cases. So, when you step up and you have, and it's shown that they have these kind of mental health challenges, and you're not allowed to voice them as a leader, that's all the stress and pressure on you, and you're not allowed to voice any of it. So it's like you're just stuck in this, just boiling pot of emotions and stress. So in going back to is it fluffy or not? Well, the statistics are showing that that's there. It's not fluffy. I mean, they need that. And that's why when we do that work with them, it's just, they're so open to it. Right. And they're so, to me, that's almost like a sponge absorbing it, because they're just not allowed normally to express any of those kinds of things. Similarly, how you start the thing off, and there's a great story in the book about the firefighter captains. Yeah. You may remember the campfire, that awful campfire was I think you were living in Reno. Yes. It was probably not too far from you, where just the whole town disappeared. Oh. And so they were interviewing the captains, and they were saying that, and the research is showing that when the captains role model safety for their folks and concern for their folks, those firefighters are more likely to be thinking safety versus risk and bravado or something, right? Now, they're amazing folks. I'm not, no matter what you're doing, they're out there in the fire, in the middle of nowhere. It's just, I can't even imagine what it must be like. Probably awful. But the more that the captain role models safety, the more, the firefighters themselves will take on, all the more of the compliance and safety instructions. So to me, role model, and I get this question a lot at the end of my talks, is I might be mindful and practice meditation, but I've got people in my group there, and I feel like, the first thing is just take care of yourself. Yeah. And therefore you're a role model for others, to take on that meditation if they need to, or to take that downgrade and freneticness, Yes. So to me, the first step is kind of start getting yourself in gear, and don't just push out and go oh, well, you guys got to fix the problem. It's well, the work starts here.
Right. Boy, howdy, do I have a way to fix you. Exactly, I just went to this lecture, and now y'all are going to do this. So two things. Our mutual friend, Heather, who's also been on the show, she has created and works with the BLM firefighters now, and they're doing a pre and a post mindfulness sessions, and and then a debrief at the end of the season, which is, and she's traveled all around Nevada doing that, which is really, anyways, that's a cool side note, that she's doing this important work, because I think you're right. When you're bringing these skills into not just corporations, but into these, whether it's firefighters, police officers, anyone who, is carrying that level of stress, but is perceived to not have to have stress, right? Because it's well, you have to be, this calm, cool, and collected, but where does all of that go? And you mentioned the word vulnerability, which is not an easy, that is something I continue to work on. It's not my favorite area of, learning. It's a growth edge, being vulnerable. And so with that vulnerability, and Brene Brown talks about the connection between vulnerability and trust. And so then we're circling all the way back to the beginning of this micromanagement. And, if someone could be vulnerable, could then that allow their team to say, well, I'm getting my, work done. We don't need to solve that, because I think that is, I'm going to calm down and bring it back to the individual, because it is that individual work. And if you can have that mindfulness, or take that breath, or take that beat, and that ripples out, people can sense that, they can feel that. And there's a way to be vulnerable or to be present without, it's not weak. But we have these weird thoughts about what vulnerability is. And so then it does create this stuffing, because we're looking at when you said that we look at leaders and, like, oh, you can't have problems or you're so strong, I was thinking about kids and how they look at their parents, and so little kids are like, oh, you're infallible. And then all of a sudden, as you grow older, you're like, oh, you're a person and you had these challenges. And so it's like, how, with leaders, we're doing the same thing. And I just said a lot of crazy words here, but not crazy, but
because
I'm all over the map.
No, well, it's yeah. So those people that I was just talking about, like, are doing role modeling.
Yeah.
Part of that role modeling is vulnerability as well. So
yes.
And the thing is that we tend to look at everything and this is the way I'm kind of interpreting what you're saying, is, and the way I speak about it is that I talk about, I have a category. I have these 3 categories I talk about in my primary keynote, which is flexibility, agency, and growth. And I call that like liberated leadership and liberating you as yourself as a leader.
Love that.
But the piece that kind of connected with me right there is flexibility, which I align very closely to perfection. So the more you're going towards perfection, and that's how I think I'm relating to it now because of what you were saying about leaders and not being able to feel vulnerable, is that we think that they are perfect,
Yes.
and we look at that, we think, oh, and then we think we have to be perfect. But perfection is just perception.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all perception, because usually, in fact, we're trying to align with someone else's idea of what perfection is. Is it my yearly performance goals? Is it something I was taught when I was a kid that I'm not even aware somewhere in my psyche? Is it something that was actually voiced by, my boss, but then it's still not my inner sense of what perfection is? And
Yes.
even if it is my inner voice, and I'm very aware of what my inner voice of perfection is perfection even something to strive for? Because we're humans, and the likelihood is we're imperfect, So in the mindfulness, the John Kabat-Zinn stuff, I kind of relate that to judgment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that, the more you're striving to perfection, which is this thing that will never be reached, you tend to be going, am I perfect? Am I perfect? No, I'm not. Oh my God. Right.
Yes.
So it tends to stop us like right in our tracks. Now, I'm kind of interested in understanding a little bit more about, you mentioned Brené Brown's alignment between trust and vulnerability. I'm kind of interested to hear a little bit more about that, because I'm not aware of how she intersects it exactly.
Well, now I'm like, I know she said it. It's in her. It's in her the latest book, the Atlas of the Heart. But she because if you're not vulnerable, then you're not known, and then if you're not known, how can people trust you? So there's a link there that I'm probably butchering. My apologies to the Dr. Brown. Who I admire so deeply, but if you think about that, like in any relationship, to be known, is vulnerability, right? Because it is like, I know you as a whole person, but if I only know you as a one-dimensional leader, then how do I trust you? Because I am seeing you through this lens of you're perfect. I am like clearly aware that I'm not perfect, but then I have to present this one-dimensional, I'm perfect to meet you're perfect, and then nothing is really happening real in between.
That makes so much sense. Is that the intersection of that is hiding or being known, and that being known also generates trust. But that's the tricky thing, is it almost feels, and it still feels to me, even though, we're trained and everything, it still feels to me like being vulnerable is going to generate somehow mistrust, because then they'll know I'm imperfect. I still have that whole, it's like impossible for me to get rid of somehow completely, Well,
why did you, I think I said the word vulnerable and immediately had that like reaction, because it is not easy to do that kind of, I'm a human being, and you're also a professor. I was a professor. Like, there's a very different, you're giving people information. It's not often, I would always tell stories on myself too, but it is, you're leading, you're in a position of authority. You have an impact on their grade and what they're doing. And so there's not, and do you remember being in like grade school or high school and like ever seeing inside the teacher's lounge and you're like, or seeing a teacher out in the wild? It's like
Right.
that weird, wait, I thought you kind of lived at school. Like, this is where I know you, so I'm going to put you here. And then we're just
Right.
expanding it into all of these areas.
Right.
And of course, the more human you are, I think the more relatable you are. And yes, you do have to sometimes, you can't have, I mean, you have to have authority if you're making decisions. You had mentioned that at the beginning, if you're doing it from a place of introspection and care, everyone's still not going to like it, but you're doing it from a place of integrity. You're doing it from a place of authenticity. So there is a fine line. I don't know what, maybe that's what our retreat should be on. Vulnerable leadership or something. I don't know. It's wild, I think, to really drill down on that.
Yeah, and I think that word authenticity, and I know in this community we love that word, but what's clicking to me right now is that that as you bring yourself to these decisions, I mean, you're making decisions. So when you make a decision and you take an action, that brings you into real life. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, and John Dewey, who you may be aware of, the big educational philosopher of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. His whole model of decision making is exactly that. It's like getting the information you have. It's very 1930s-ish,
Sure.
language, but it's like coming into this this awareness sensibility of the external components. And so in contextual intelligence and in critical thinking, you would think of that as the context, the environment you're working in, plus your knowledge, and then doing internal reflection. And then based on the internal reflection, which includes, he calls it judgment, but it's really like, how does it affect people? It's kind of like a deeper sense. And then coming out to, okay, now that I fully understand everything, how it's going to affect people, what the actual context is, now I can make a decision on what to do. But then that last piece of now taking action, that is actually creating something in the real world through this external review exercise. And that is actually what's defining you to the external world. So the actions you take, that's how what's affecting people. That's how people see you. That's your expression of life, really, is the actions you're taking in the outside world. And so this is where the decision making is so impactful to who you become as a person and how you individuate, how that process of individuation, how you basically come to realize yourself in the world. That's where that's to me where the rubber meets the road. Because you're affecting people, maybe you're only affecting yourself, but it's your external expression coming from your internal internal review, which is now your authentic self being expressed into the outside world.
Yes, if you allow yourself to authentically express into the world, because as you said, your actions. And so if my actions were driven from a place of like, I want to be seen as infallible or whatever, it wouldn't be how I show up, right? Like someone said that they enjoyed something I did because I laugh at myself. And I'm like, yeah, I will always, that's what I'm bringing to the party. And that's my actions. But this taking action piece, I think when we think about behavior change, when we think about anything, people can really stay in the planning, the wanting, the learning stage, and then the taking action stage gets really hard, because then what is that? It's vulnerability. If you are showing up fully, right? So it's pressing record or sharing a message on LinkedIn or sharing a message on social media, or, having a conversation live that you didn't know was going to be live. And so it is that action piece. And I think within the action, if if you are doing it from, and I think authenticity does get a little overused, and I think it gets a little muddied, what's your authentic self? I mean,
Right.
just anyways, but taking action that is aligned with who you are and who you want to be in the world is how people would know you. So I think that there's something really juicy or interesting in that idea of how am I acting? What is my action in the world? What am I showing the world? And and I think that, I mean, I am not a medical doctor, but from my own experience, I would say that depression and anxiety for me really is strongest when I'm not aligned with inside and outside, right? Like that there's something misaligned there. And so if people, are listening or thinking and going like, well, what does this mean? Vulnerability? I don't want to be vulnerable. No one wants to be, but it is taking action in alignment with your values. I think that's what when you talk about that within the book and everything too.
100%. And the idea of the authentic self in terms of decision making and leading as well is also the act of reviewing biases, whether they're coming from you or externally. But what I'm thinking specifically is when you're under pressure to make a decision, you're getting everyone's pressures around you, especially if you're, not especially, but let's imagine you're in the C-suite. But I'm thinking even like when you're someone taking care of your parents, you've got siblings, you've got friends. Oh, have you thought about this? I did it. This is what I did. And you think, oh, I'm not doing that. Oh my God. Or even like when you're a parent, I remember when I had a little kid in the house, it was like, you get everyone's story and now you have to go like, okay, well, that's all too much for me. I'm just going to like give them a cookie or whatever. But but with the authentic self and the biases, I'm thinking like when you're under stress and specifically when you're, in this case, when you're a strategic thinker, right? And you've got the board coming after you. You've got the shareholders coming after you. You've got the people, your whole entire 300,000 person organization waiting for you to make a decision. And so if you haven't been through a process of being able to work with this, you're feeling all those pressures, right? And you're feeling not only those pressures to make the right decision, but 90% of the time you're also feeling the pressure to make a quick decision, right? And so you're just thinking, oh, just get it off my freaking plate. And this what normally happens in these cases is, and if you're not in an innovative, in an environment that supports innovation and disruptive thinking, is you just wind up going back to whatever succeeded last time. Because you're like, hey man, I know that worked. Let me just do it again. And you see this over and over and over again. I mean, Kodak cameras, digital cameras is like the key. I mean, look at what they did there. They invented the digital camera. I mean, how many of us own digital cameras anymore? But I mean, when they were, a thing versus just having a camera on your phone, it was like Kodak was not the one, but they created it. But what they said is, oh, digital cameras, I mean, what the heck? We're a film company. We make chemicals and we make film. That's what the shareholders want. That's what the decision at the top was made, is like, I'm not even going to look at this stupid thing. There's just some crazy guys over in the corner there, So, and they threw it away. So in that environment, they weren't allowed to, and who took it up? Fujifilm. Because the president of Fujifilm said, oh, I know we're having a big peak. After a big peak comes a valley, so I'm going to start looking at new things to do, right? So it's a completely different mindset. Yes. But when you're under those pressures to make the right decision, a fast decision, and you are succumbing to those, that we contract, right?
Yes.
So all you do is your whole decision-making process contracts. So part of what I work with leaders is actually to kind of open up the decision-making process, even if your time is not expanded, just like chronic pain, right? Even if you can't get rid of the pain, because it's chronic pain, what we do is open more space around it, and that pain becomes smaller and smaller, right? Even though it still exists, I can still function in the world, and other things are happening, versus just letting those pressures just act upon me and force me into a decision I don't want to make.
Yes. And when you're talking about like that contraction or making decisions quickly, there's also something in there that is about like mistakes are okay. Like there's so much of that, whether you are in, healthcare or, whatever field you're in. If they don't allow you to learn from your mistakes, then no one's going to front up that they had a mistake, right? So they're going to be like, no, or, and there's all these, it gets real messy when people are trying to like navigate that versus having a culture that is like, oh, okay, well, we tried this, it didn't work. Okay, now we have some data, and then we move on and do something else, because and so that there's also that piece of like wanting to not make a mistake. And so of course, with Kodak saying, like, this is what we do, this is what people want, and this is how we've always done it, versus saying like, I don't know what else is out there. And that opening to what else is possible can feel really scary, because what if it doesn't work? To your point, it worked. It's been working for Kodak, and so why would they change it? And I think that even in our everyday lives, it can be this idea of, well, this has, whether it's like relationships, friendships, romantic partners, children, parents, whatever. It's like, well, this is how we've always done it, right? And this, we don't talk about our feelings or whatever. And so it's like trying something new and being okay with mistakes. How do you kind of get people to that place? Because isn't that what it's about, like being open to mistakes too?
Oh man, have you honed onto the thing? And you're right. It's like we know. Sorry, I have an allergy thing today. We find that safe space. So the safe space is doing everything that, like I'm saying, like, in the case of businesses, we just repeat the same successes, which again, don't advance the company. So eventually you just topple. Or we're in, like you're saying, relationships, which may or may not be working, but we know it. So it feels safe. So it feels right. I mean, it kind of doesn't, that last piece doesn't seem to work anymore, because taking risks is the unknown, and the unknown is the scary thing. Right. And to me, I mean, it's a tough one, because I have, problems with this myself in taking risks. But the way it becomes a little simpler, although taking a risk is always a risk. I mean, there's always something that may not work out. It's the judgment piece that goes with it that becomes the stuff you got to get rid of, I think. Right?
Oh, sure.
And that's the part of like saying, and you talked about at the very beginning, right? Is like, even in just a meditation, am I meditating right? I'm not relaxing right. I've now meditated 3 days in a row for 10 minutes each, and I'm not feeling any better. And, that's not honing in, because the meditation is the process. Yes. It's not necessarily the outcome. And that's why at the very beginning we talked about the relaxation being almost more of a byproduct, although you may be starting it to do that, but it's really about the process of being aware. And so when you become aware, part of what you become aware of is the judgments.
Yes. Oh yeah. Right.
And then we can start doing techniques, to allow the judgment to flow through like a cloud, or, whatever the prompts are going to be and whatever the work's going to be. I mean, it's different for everybody. But those kinds of things are allowing those judgments to come, and what I've found more and more, and maybe you found the same thing, and you probably actually know this before I did, is that the more it's just like pain, just like the pain itself. The more we focus on, I'm not going to have a judgment, is like, then we're just like, it's like, don't think about pink elephants, right? It's like, it's like, that's all you're doing is trying to avoid that thing. The more you're just allowing it to go, oh, it's here. Now I see it. Now it's floating away. Yes. Oh, maybe it came back. No, because that's the problem. The perfection is, I'm going to stop this. I'm never going to have another judgment thought in my life, and Right? Yes. I mean, like, that never works. I mean, maybe it works for somebody sometime, but I mean, from everything I've seen, it doesn't work, right?
Yes, and there's the phrase that I love. It might be from like the 12-step world, but it's the what you resist persists, because it is almost like when Charlie was trying to teach me how to dirt bike once. The one time I was on this little teeny dirt bike and I saw this big rock, and I'm like, what do I do? What about the rock? And he's like, don't look at the rock. Don't look at the rock. Don't look at the rock, because wherever you look, look is where you're driving. And so this has become like a motto in our family is like, don't look at the rock, because you're just like, when you're focusing so much on that, then it's like you can't open up. You can't open up to possibility, whether that's, as an individual, a corporate C-suite leader, or in a relationship.
Oh, can I tell you a similar story about
Yes,
learning
please.
to ski?
Yes.
So I started to learn to ski when I was about 50, and I'm just historically terrible at sports or anything that requires a ball or any kind of sport, mechanical thing. But but my daughter decided she wanted to ski race, so she was ski racing. So I'm there all day, all weekend long. So I just said, yeah, I'm here. Let me learn to ski. So it was pretty messy. But the thing is like when you're looking down the hill, right? And it's kind of like, oh my God, there's this giant hill, right? But the teacher was like, no, just look at me. Don't look at the hill. So I think of that as like your rock,
Yes.
right? Like, don't look at the rock. I'm going to go ski over to that tree. So she sees a cross, right?
Gotcha.
And so she's teaching me to go, back and forth across the hill, right? So she goes, just look at me and just flatten your skis out and look at me. And it's like, it takes so little effort
Yes.
when you just let yourself go. And that's the thing about the risk, is the risk is the letting go.
Yes.
And you let yourself go and just look. To me, the looking is the intention. Look where you want to go. To me, that's
Yes.
intention. So you
Yes.
just flatten out the skis and then look with intention. And all of a sudden, your body just starts taking you there, because you've just given that little impetus of a movement, and you flatten it out, and you just start moving. And then she kind of went to the other side. She goes, don't do anything. I'm just going to go over there. Okay, now just flatten your skis and turn around and look at me. Ooh, I'm not thinking, she's not even saying like ski to me. She's just saying like, just look at me and just come over here.
Yes.
Right? And all of a sudden it's like you're skiing down the hill, and that the big risk of like, oh my God, it's like, that looks like a 10,000 foot drop, is like, no, I'm just skiing to there. I'm just skiing to there. I'm just going to there. And I'm actually just going over to say hi to my friend, my teacher.
Yes.
So it's a totally different mindset.
And that is a great way to think of any big plan or outcome. And it's that idea of like, where are you setting your attention? But in like MBSR, we learn that, like letting be or letting go. And, my hands are like kind of out stretched right now, because it's like, well, can you just let it be and say like, this is my intention, but I don't have control out of the outcome because to go, back to the beginning of our conversation, change is always happening. So there's no guarantee of any one outcome. But if we can say like, okay, I'm going to take this step, I'm going to go in this direction, I'm going to go in this direction, I'm going to go, and then all of a sudden you're at the bottom of the hill and you're like, holy schmoly, like I just did that, and exactly. But I think that's with any big undertaking. You and I both have our, doctorate degrees, which is its own mountainous experience. And so it's like, but it was really, if I look back, I'm like, oh, okay, so it was one point after the other. I love that story. I mean, Dr. Doug, like good stuff. That I like that a lot. So if people want to work with you, so I know you're a professor, but when you're kind of branching out, and your website is really stunning, by the way. So people check out the website that'll be available in the show notes and everything. So how can people work with you?
Yeah, so the best way is to look at the website, and there's links there to contact me. You can also, if you want to email me, you can douglas.scherer@columbia.edu. You can also DM me. I mean, the best way is to go to the website, though, because it also gives you like a ton of information about my work, which includes consulting to board members. The keynote talks is kind of the main thing, and then workshops that go along with that. And you'll see all the other stuff, the books I'm working on, just to let you know, like for the next 5 years of writing, I'm working on a workbook that goes along with Forged that I want to be able to bring that to different workshops and retreats. And then I've got Forged for parents in mind. I've got Forged for work. And then my doctoral research was on how the life journey intersects with C-suite leadership and how they mentor to the next generation. So I'm going to be doing Forge for Mentors kind of based on that, and plus new Gen Z research. So it's almost like mentoring to the Gen Z generation of leaders is what it's going to be about. So I've got isn't that cool? It sounds cool.
That's so
right?
rad. Like that is like, yeah, like
got
you
the
said,
outline.
it's the next 5 years of work. I always like to leave people with like a little action item. So based on our conversation, based on your work, if someone were to like, take some step or action after listening to us, what would that be?
Wow. I would say, well, there's two things. One is I would say and you have some great materials on your website, some meditations and stuff I've noticed. So I would say the first thing is I would just check out your meditations. I don't have any recordings right now on my website. So in order to get them going, and it's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Thanks for the plug.
I have to again appreciate that the work you did during the pandemic. I was like, I think it started like every other day, or
it was every day for 3 months, and then it went to 3 times. Yeah,
life-saving stuff. I mean, really. It's just you created a community there. I was so appreciative to be part of it. But I would say definitely check out your stuff at your website. What's your website?
It's ccwithdrt.com.
I love it.
Yeah. So anyways, or theresabscore.com will get you there as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the co-plug.
I was just wondering, would it make sense? I could take like a bit of one of the chapters I was talking about the local food pantry leaders. And like I could take that little piece and like turn it into a PDF if people want to like grab it from your website or from somewhere.
I would love that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That would be so cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. And what a good story that is. And thank you for your enthusiastic support of my work. But please do check out Dr. Doug and his information in his book Forged. So I can plug you there. Where is I don't know my words off the top of my head. Okay. I always have to come that. So thank you all for tuning in to Creating Connection with Dr. T. I'm grateful you chose to spend this time with us today. Reach out with any questions, comments, or show ideas. And thank you so much for sharing the show. Join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central, 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, take good care of yourself and others. And I'll see you back here on November 6th with return guest Denise Barclay, where we'll discuss mindfulness and life transitions. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss. If we're lucky, let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.